Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 562XP chainsaw. This saw has already been diagnosed as needing an ignition module. So in this video we're going to take a look at what's needed to do to replace an ignition module on one of these modern auto-tune chainsaws. So first we're going to take off the starter cover, access the module. Then we're going to take a look underneath the cylinder cover so that we can remove the spark plug wire from the spark plug. And in order to do this repair, we're going to have to pretty much remove the carburetor. There's a grounding screw that's located underneath the carburetor. And there are wires that run from the ignition module up to the auto-tune module that's bolted onto the side of the carb. The wiring harness that runs between the two is located behind the flywheel. I like to use the brass hammer and pry bar method for popping flywheels off. And by using those Q-tips, I'm able to hold the starter pawls out of the way so that I can get a good smack on that nut without hitting those pawls and bending them. You saw it came off pretty easy. So there's our air nozzle. That's got to come out of the way. That nozzle directs air from the fan up toward the carburetor. And then there's a single screw that holds this wiring harness down into a groove on the side of the crankcase. I think it uses like a T15. I had a scrunch handy, so I used that. Two screws that hold the ignition module into the case. And there's our coil. But it's still connected to the carburetor. So we're going to remove the screws that hold the air box on. They also sandwich the carburetor up to the intake. Sometimes them screws can be a little tricky to pull out of there. Then there's some rubber saddles that air box is snapped into. We'll just pop them out of the way. Fuel line comes off. Fuel line on the back of the purge bulb comes off. And now we have pretty decent access to the wiring harness on the carburetor. That white plug is snapped into a retainer that's part of the auto-tune module. And we just depress the little tang on there and then separate the wire. So now that white plug and wiring harness will pull out through the side of the crankcase, but the grounding wire is still on there. And that ground screw is kind of hidden right up in there, right behind the cylinder. And when you look really close at it, there's kind of a saddle that the eyelet of the wire sits in. When you put it back together, take a close look at that. That saddle will kind of hold the eyelet from spinning when you tighten the nut down. So we harvested our old coil, now we're going to put in the new one. And it's just reverse order. Snake the white plug through the side of the crankcase, which sounds easier than it is, really. There it is. So which direction you go from here is entirely up to you. You could screw down the wiring harness right now, and that'll kind of hold in place. or you could continue with the wiring on the carburetor. Doesn't really matter. I've got the ground wire there that I'm pushing down to its location. And you know, you can get these things so they kind of line up on their own. The hardest part, I think, is making sure you got enough light in there so you can see what you're doing. So I'm just going to use a magnet holding the screw and get it through the wire eyelet and down into the hole. Making sure that the eyelet is sitting in the saddle that holds it in place, and then we'll just crank her down. Just crank her down. Crank it down. Okay, he cranked her down. Now we can reconnect the white wire connector and then snap it into the holder on the side of the auto-tune module of the carburetor. Be careful when you do this so you don't damage any of the wiring on the connector. It's a little bit fumbly, but it's not bad. That'll just snap right into place like that. Now we kind of jumped over to the wiring harness near the coil. I imagine I got interrupted while I was doing this repair, and this is just where I picked it back up. There's no good reason for not finishing up at the carburetor. So we're going old school, and we're going to use that scrunch again to turn this screw down. It's almost painful to watch. This is our air nozzle. There's a single screw that holds that in place. And as you follow this video along, you're going to find that I made a big mistake here. See if you can pick up on what it is before I reveal it. And at the end of the video, I'm also going to show you how I'll never make that mistake again. I don't know how I lost that Q-tip. It's sitting right there. How do I not see it? It's kind of funny to me. So we'll line up the keyway on the flywheel with the slot in the crankshaft. And then we'll apply 22 to 24 Newton meters of force on that nut. And then we'll take our feeler gauge, install it between the ignition module and the flywheel magnet, and then crank down the ignition module. Now we have to put our, I guess they call that an air deflector or a fan cover. Put that in place, get the spark plug wire routed up. Hey, pick that up. Get that spark plug wire routed, and then it fits in a slot in this fan cover. And then there's a couple of pins that were on that air nozzle that face up right now, and they locate that fan cover in place. And then on goes our starter. Okay, let's finish up with the carburetor. We got our wiring connection together. We got to get our air box kind of sandwiched between the carburetor and the back of the case, keeping in mind that there is a fuel line that has to hook to the primer bulb. There is a choke linkage that has to engage with that red kill switch. The spring on the kill switch will be underneath the choke lever, so when you push down on the kill switch, it's spring loaded. Now this return line gets snapped into place on the back of the air box and then pushed onto the back of the long stem of the primer bulb. And then our other fuel line gets put back on the carburetor. This comes from the short stem on the primer bulb. So our stop switch looks good. Our throttle cable, that kind of naturally fell into place, and that's not the first time that that's happened. Then we'll put the rubber saddles back on the air box, plug wire, air filter. We'll see if this thing runs. So, yeah, it ran, but something's not right. And I already know what's not right, because this has happened to me now for the third time that I can remember. I did this once on a big steel chainsaw, and then when I was demoing it, the repair to the customer, I heard a funny clinking noise. And then I realized what I had done, and I had to fix it for the guy. And I did it one other time, and now I did it again. Yeah, shame on me. So that feeler gauge got left inside. I don't know why. I think just because it's kind of hiding when I put it in there, but sometimes I forget to pull it out. So it was laying in there, and it certainly could have done some damage, but it didn't. And it didn't the other two times either. So let's see what we got now. So the saw runs fine. What I decided to do was take two of these feeler gauges, and I riveted them together in an L shape. Now, when I put the gauge in, like that right there, there's no way I'm going to miss that. I mean, I can't even physically put the saw back together. So there's your tip for the day. If you're stupid like I am, then you need that little training wheel on your feeler gauge. So that's all I got for you on the 562XP ignition module swap. Thanks for watching. Later.